Hello, this is Phil Wagoner. I'm here today with the latest edition of my podcast, Raising Godly Children in an Ungodly World. In it, I'm interviewing young men and women who have gone through or are currently in the last 2 years of high school or college, or are new to navigating the world as an adult. These are young people who have kept their faith in God through the social and mental pressures that affect us all, especially young adults who are trying to find their niche in life. I want to know how they did it and are continuing to do it as they go from one step to the next in life. Then, when possible, we'll talk to their parents and get their perspective on their involvement. And at the end, I'll expound on a scripture from the Bible that talks about parenting. Hello, this is Phil Wagner. I'm here today with a new podcast and a kind of a new venue. I'm interviewing somebody that I just met 24 hours ago, personally. I've heard about him. If you all remember the interviews we did with the Kinsellas, Grace and Danny and Rachel, and then of course their parents, Dan and Carrie, all those were some of the best podcasts we've done. Well, I've got with me today Grace's fiance. His name is Zach Phillips, and he's started out in California and went to the Midwest for a while to attend Notre Dame, and then all the way over to the East Coast, Manhattan, where he's living now. And he's got a really good story, and I want to jump right into it. So this is Zach Phillips. Hello, Zach.
Hey, Phil. How's it going?
It's going well. I'm glad to be here with you. You're kind of a hard guy to get a hold of. Of course, you only live 1,500 miles away. So
that's right. I'm all over the place. Had to be here for this, though. Had to be here for this.
That's good. Well, I know who I've been told Zach Phillips is. I've heard a lot of good things about you. But who do you say Zach Phillips is?
Yeah, good question. Well, as you mentioned, my name is Zachary Phillips. I was born in California, 2002, oldest of three with two younger sisters and two loving parents. Really, I had a great childhood. I loved everything about it. Went to a Ocean Shore school in California, and one thing that was huge for me was music. I was doing in band since 5th grade. Played the tuba.
Wow.
And played the tuba until all the way up into college. Was in the Notre Dame marching band as well.
Oh wow! I don't know if I've ever known a 5th grader that could play the tuba.
It was heavy. It was heavy. So I was working on the muscles.
Yeah, I see.
Yeah, was big into music throughout middle school, and eventually that led me to high school, where I attended a school which I was mainly focused on music there. They had a great band, but a different type of school, you could say. It was an all-boys Catholic school, Archbishop Riordan in San Francisco, California.
Okay, wait. So, was that close to your home? Was that
it was like a 15-minute commute.
Oh, okay. So you didn't go away to school.
No.
Okay, all right.
It wasn't. All
right. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
Oh, no worries. But of course, the big difference was I was somebody who was not Catholic or even Christian, not baptized or anything like that, who's now attending all boys Catholic school and brought in because of music. But there I got very involved in lots of things. I was someone that liked to be in front of crowds, having microphones, but I think I expressed that performing thing through music, but I got involved in lots of other things, which I had mentioned a bit to you, but that led to me joining campus ministry as non-Christian, I guess you'd say, or someone that didn't really know much about it. And so I helped run the masses there and run the charitable drives and basically create that Christian community at Riordan as someone who my freshman year was not Christian.
Okay, let me get my head around this now. Yeah, so you're confessing that you were not a Christian. Did you think you were a Christian?
Not really, and I think that mainly just came down to that I didn't really know much about it at all.
I see.
And I think to give you some more context there, I hadn't mentioned it, but my dad was Catholic or raised Catholic, not really practicing. So when I was born, not practicing. And my mom is Lutheran.
Okay.
Not really practicing now. But I think it kind of just came down to I didn't really get much of a Christian education. And like I didn't attend Mass or a Lutheran service or anything like that.
So what to you constitutes a Christian?
Well, I think most simply a Christian is somebody who follows Jesus, a follower of Christ. And the reason I also say I wasn't Christian was more so as I didn't even have the knowledge to really follow Christ in a traditional faith sense. Of course,
Were you a good kid?
I would say so. I think I was
Yeah.
a good kid. I was staying out of trouble.
Okay,
So,
that's what that.
exactly.
I could have asked the question that way.
So I was not getting too much attention or anything like
Mhm.
that, or having any really big issues. But I think I do thank my parents a lot for that. I still have two amazing parents who love me very much, and I think raised me up with really great values. And I think that's one thing that's kind of confusing at times too, is I was not raised with a like faith necessarily. However, I feel like I was raised with Christian values for the
Sure,
most part.
sure.
And I think that those are two different things, but of course
But they work together.
they work together. Absolutely, they work together. But of course, I think at some points, without even knowing it, I was still thirsting for something that was a Christian faith.
Right.
And the way I even suggest that came about was in middle school times, perhaps about 7th or 8th grade.
Mhm.
I guess these are strong questions to be asking in middle school. I had questions like, what is life all about? Or is this just something where we live for 70, 80 years and pass away, and
Right.
that's the end of it? Or is there something more to this? I just didn't really have answers to those sorts of questions. And I think that not having answers to those sorts of things in middle school made me kind of sad, which, as I mentioned, kind of
Really.
more mature thoughts to be having at those age. But I think I was just sort of looking for something deeper.
Well, I was a children's minister for 30 plus years, and I did a lot of camps and different things like
Mhm.
that. And you say that those seem like mature thoughts for a middle schooler,
Mhm.
but I think you find that a lot.
Not as rare as you think.
But what's rare is we don't talk about it.
Yes.
We don't talk to each other.
Yes.
I'm not going to go to my best friend and say, "Hey, what do you think of Jesus?
Yeah.
What do you
exactly.
think happens to us when we die? What do you,
Yeah.
So I think that's where we're coming, and that's important that young people recognize that
Yes.
that you're not being weird when you're wanting to follow God.
Yes, yeah, and I completely agree with that. People do inherently have those questions, and they want them to be answered.
Mhm.
And that just reminds me of when Jesus asks us to be childlike.
Yeah.
He's asking children ask questions like, why, and it keeps leading to these further things. And I think inherently everyone is looking for those sorts of answers, and not only is everyone searching for those answers, but for the most part, people find answers for themselves, whether that be a Christian faith or whether that be something that is not a Christian faith. It could be something as like money or cars or all those sorts of things, or even like a sports team or things that are sacred to them.
Right.
And I think everyone sort of has those sorts of things to them, or like a career progression, things like that people put their worth in and sort of dedicate themselves to, in the sense that we typically dedicate ourselves or try to dedicate ourselves to Christ as Christians.
Mm.
So people find those answers. But the reason I even bring up that story is just to sort of say that my heart was, I feel, ready, cultivated by something.
Mhm.
And I was ready to put myself into something, but I just did not have the education yet to say Christianity is the thing I want to dedicate myself to.
Sure. So these feelings inside of you, these desires inside of you, how did you handle peer pressure? Do you feel like you had a lot of peer pressure to go the other way?
I would say so. I mean, especially being in an all-male setting.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I think all-boys school was fantastic for me. Of course, there's going to be some sort of distractions from being truly masculine and being a Christian man, whether that be lustful conversations,
Sure,
or whether that be alcohol or things which are seen as like cool, but in reality miss the mark on what masculinity is for the most part.
Oh, absolutely. You and I know that. You know that, obviously. So how did you navigate yourself through that, or did you?
Well, I think that one challenge is a lot of times people come face to face with things which are deemed as societally really cool. Because a lot of things that's a challenge is that I feel that like true Christian masculinity is sort of the opposite of what worldly masculinity looks like for them.
Well, it's not sort of, it is.
Yes, it is. Okay, yeah, we'll call a spade a spade.
Yeah.
But for example, I'd say, you look at people who are worldly seen as very male and role models, and a lot of times it's like, oh, they have so much money, they have so much attention from women, they have so much fame, they have so much fortune, where those are inherently selfish things. And I think that even young people at that high school age are enamored by the prospect of being prideful in what they have in that sense. Whereas I think that something that was important to realize and that Christianity introduced to me is that I feel that real masculinity is not having a lot, but more so giving up more and more of yourself, whether that be through a relationship. And I think that's definitely something I'm exploring with my fiance, Grace Kinsella, now, or whether that be through giving up time for prayer and worship, or whether that be time for family or time for the poor. I think that's what true masculinity looked like. And I think that another part of that is, as a male in high school, and not even just a male, but all these people are looking for ways to express that need to like have a higher self and less of yourself and more focused on others. And sometimes we get confused with the world saying, be more prideful, have more money, be famous. But in reality, I think that what's most satisfying is.
So let me ask you this question then. So the guys on Wednesday night said, hey, my folks are going to be out of town this weekend. We're going to have an off-the-wall party. You're coming, right? So what's your answer?
Well, in high school, I mean, to be straightforward with you, I feel like in high school I wasn't even involved in that as much. I think college is more so where alcohol was more of a pressing distraction.
But okay, so in high school you say you weren't. Was that because of the group of friends you had, or was that because that was kind of the norm in your school?
I think that was definitely a norm at the school. Parties were not as much of a distraction.
Really?
But I think that lustful conversations were more of a distraction. Or I think that prideful conversations or fighting or things like that were more challenging.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's get back to your story. So when did you become a Christian? How did you be, what led you there? Or tell me that story.
Well, I think that my first encounter with Christianity was really in freshman year of high school, where we had monthly masses, we had to take religion classes, and I think that was a very daunting thing to me as being somebody who had no education in that already. I mean, I didn't even know what the cross stood for.
Really?
I didn't know what that meant. I didn't know it was the vehicle of the passion. I just really considered it as a Christian emblem. But it hadn't meant anything to me yet. But I think that the thing that was important to me was I luckily was childlike in the way that rather than dismissing it or saying like, I don't want to learn about this, I was asking questions of, what does this mean? Why do we go to church on Sundays, or why do other people go to church on Sundays? Because I was not yet. And all these questions, and I just liked the answers I was hearing. To start with the cross and Jesus on the cross, hearing that Jesus made a sacrifice for us to save us from our own sin and bring us salvation. That's a inherently positive thing for somebody to hear. If you just take that at face value, to hear that God came down, died for us, and brought us eternal salvation and rest. There's nothing about that statement which should be really scary to somebody. It should be like, I'm excited to receive that. And I think that's how I felt. I loved what I was hearing. And just being around this and wanting to learn more led me to go to do campus ministry and be in groups like that, or have conversations about that with my Christian friends. And I think that when it really cultivated to make me say, I want to become a Christian, I want to be baptized, was with one of those campus ministry groups that was in charge of running the masses, which is kind of funny that I'm someone that can't really participate in mass fully because I'm not baptized and I'm not Christian. well, I guess you could say I was Christian in the way that I thought positively of Christ, but
Mhm.
being a part of that team, which I joined, we had like a retreat. Some of you of the listeners might have heard this, but Steubenville, it's like a Catholic high schoolers retreat, basically.
Okay.
And I was attending as somebody who was not baptized yet. And it's basically this big thing where they've got keynote speakers, and there's music, and there's mass, and there's all sorts of
Right.
Christian activities. I was just hearing these things of like there's salvation to be offered, and there's forgiveness to be offered, and there's this God that loves you. And I think that inherently I said, like, I want the fullness of this and I want to participate in it. And that led to me going to a confession. And the Catholics were getting in line for confession, confess their sins, and be rid of them. I couldn't participate in that yet because I wasn't baptized and I wasn't educated on what it meant to do that. But I got in line with a priest who was also from San Francisco, and I basically I told him I'm not Christian. I can't fully participate in this, but I just could I share my sins with you?
Let me stop you real
Yes,
quick
go
here. How old were you? Were you a freshman in high school?
Freshman in high school.
All right.
Between freshman and sophomore year of high school.
See, that's blowing me away that you were thinking like that as a freshman. We talked about those are logical questions for a younger man.
Yeah.
But I think by the time my experience tells me, time you become a freshman, at that age, you've grown out of it. You've answered those questions. This is the direction I'm going to go, and so you're kind of moving. But anyway, all right. So then the other thing is, I've heard you say, I wasn't baptized yet. I wasn't baptized. Is it being baptized? Is that what made you a Christian, or?
Well, I guess that being baptized into the body of Christ when I was eventually baptized was a critical step in becoming a Christian. I don't know the answer to say, is someone who's not baptized and saying, I'm following Christ, are they a Christian? I'm not sure is the answer to that, but I knew for me.
Well, all right, let's talk about the grace of God. How does that work to you?
Yeah.
All right, let me ask you this. Are you a Christian?
Yes.
Okay. So why do you say you're a Christian?
Why I say I'm Christian? Because I follow Christ. He's my Savior, and I will openly pronounce that.
Okay, so there you go. That's what that follows with what Jesus told us to do.
And I
believe in me.
Yeah, believe in me, and I'm obedient to Him, and that led me to, in being obedient to Him, He said, be baptized.
Okay.
And that's what I do.
Okay.
That's what I did.
All right. That answers all that.
Yes. So I was going into confession with a priest and basically told him I can't fully participate in this yet in the Catholic sense. And he just said, like, well, just tell me your sins and we can pray for you instead. And it was a really emotional scene for me where I was just saying these sins. I'm saying, like, I want to be fully in communion with God, and I want all of this. I want to be a participant in God's journey, and I want to be a participant in what He wants for me, basically. And I said, like, I'm ready to be baptized, and I want to be confirmed. I want to receive First Communion. I want to do what a Catholic is supposed to do, and join this church. And he said, like, let's do it. And to loop in what you're saying about grace, that's one thing that even like coming into this podcast was a little nerve-wracking for me, is that when you're asked the question, what made you convert? It's hard to really pinpoint it. It's because it's more so a calling. And I feel like for years, when people ask me, why'd you convert? I would try and give some explanation of like a very rhetorical or logically based reason of how I mentally came to God is real and Christ is the Son of God. But I think the reality is that the grace and the faith comes before reason. I just felt a calling in my heart based on asking those higher questions that led me to have the faith to realize this is true. Jesus is the Savior and the Messiah. And I fully believe that. And I think it's something that through grace I was gifted, and I believe now full-heartedly And
So it's not a result of any works that you did, although you did works mentally, and baptized would be physically, but it's not a result of that. The Christianity is a result of the grace of God.
it was definitely grace.
Yeah.
It was definitely grace. And I think that that's so important because as somebody, even myself, who has at times thought like, okay, like how could I bring more people to Christianity? How could I, preach is a sometimes a loaded term, but how could I evangelize other people? A lot of times I feel like people head towards the direction of, oh, I need to tell them why it's true, or I need to give them the reason, or I need to come up with some philosophical answer of why Christianity is real. But I think at the end of the day, it all has to start with loving prayer of asking God, please give this person the grace to know the truth that you are the Messiah and know that you are God, and then to proclaim that. And I think that just realizing and recognizing that is how I became Christian. Was I was basically remembered as how I feel about it. Is God gave me that grace to make that conversion and to feel those ways and lead me in the right direction to my eventual baptism and confirmation and first communion and confession. That is the best gift I've ever received.
I couldn't agree with you more. As far as we try to lay down a direction for people, because we want them to know what we know, because it's not, I heard a question asked of a basketball player the other day. Do you think that you could beat this certain person on a one-on-one game? He said, I don't think, I know. and that's the way I am with Christianity. I don't think I'm a Christian. I know I'm a Christian. And it's because of that grace that's in me. But so I have a tendency to want to say, well, okay, then do step A, step B, and you'll feel the same way as I do.
Yes.
But you won't. No. It's because of that grace.
Yes, it's because of that grace. Yeah. Certainly. So I feel like that grace and that faith come first. But however, a part of my story that I hadn't gotten to yet also with just who is Zach Phillips is, so eventually I got confirmed, baptized sophomore year of high school. And that wasn't the end of it. That led to a much deeper understanding of, okay, I have faith and I have this grace and I want to learn more about this faith. Because we're lucky to be Christians where we have this deep, deep tradition of church fathers and people who have written about being a Christian, genius people who were inspired by the Holy Spirit and inspired by God. I mean, even the Bible, we have these texts which are so fantastic, and just wanting to learn more and more about that. And what that eventually led me to is I went to Notre Dame, and I was a double major. I had a business degree as well, but I also got a degree in theology.
Did you go to Notre Dame because you wanted to go to a Catholic college, because you wanted that theology educate? Why did you pick Notre Dame? Or because it's not an easy school to get into.
Yeah, I know, Phil. This is I could talk all day about Notre Dame.
Okay.
I love Notre Dame very deeply. I mean, I wish everyone could see right now. I'm wearing my Notre Dame theology T-shirt.
Yes, you are.
and I wear the Notre Dame class ring all the time. So I'm all about ND. But to answer your question, why I went there, I think there's a few reasons. Well, first of all, they had the marching band, so I was in the band. They had a great business school. I also, that's my job now. I'm in business, and also, yes, they have a theology department, which is the best in the world, and I wanted to learn more, and I was excited that all those things culminated into the best option for me. So I made that decision. But to continue where I was at, the theology was a huge part of it. I wanted to learn more about the Christian faith. And the reason why I even bring that up is earlier I had said, I feel like a lot of times we try and evangelize, we give people reasons of here's A, then B, then C, and this is how you become Christian, and this is it. Yes, number one is faith and grace comes first for conversion. However, I'm brought to the term of St. Augustine when he said, faith seeking understanding. And what that means is Augustine is saying we have this faith, and we like you're saying, Phil. I know I'm Christian. But through that faith, we sort to seek an understanding of our faith, of our Christianity, and that led to me having a deep interest in the tradition of the church and having a deep seeking to learn more about why does the Mass look like this? What's the biblical foundation of this tradition we have? And I think that's been something that's been really exciting for me, being able to intellectually explore Christianity, because I feel like a lot of times people think that Christians are over their heads or worshiping some sort of flying spaghetti monster or something fake. But the reality is, if you open up the pages of church doctors, or you open up the page of Christian intellectuals, you're not going to find people who are just turning their reason off. However, they are people who are inspired by that faith and that grace, first of all. So obviously it's a long journey, but my point is to say we do have reason, but that faith is where it all starts.
I really like what you just said about faith is not turning your reasoning off.
Not at all.
It's exploring the reason behind faith.
Mm-hmm.
So let's shift gears a little bit. How does a young man or a young woman who is in high school, how would you tell them to navigate their way through the peer pressure that they're facing in high school? I know that one of the big things going on around in the schools around us now is vaping marijuana. Mm-hmm. So it's drugs, and then of course alcohol, which has been there since I've been. Yeah. And then of course you'd mentioned that one of the big deals in your high school was the lust and the talk and this and that. So how would you tell somebody to navigate their way through that now?
I think it starts with having the right role models and having the right mentors. And I think that looks a lot of different ways for a lot of people. For example, my dad, still my hero. I felt that if I wasn't able to tell him about something and for him to be proud of it, then it was not the right thing to be doing. And the same thing with my mother. Luckily, I had two parental figures who were that way. But the reality is that not everyone is lucky enough to have those two parents. So finding other ways, whether that be a teacher we respect deeply and has the right ideas in mind and the right values in mind, but or a pastor or a priest or those sorts of things. But I think speaking specifically to men, we just have to really, really focus on the mentorship in this world that is not worldly and leads you to a higher being. And I think the number one mentor for all of us is Christ on the cross. Seeing that and seeing that is the apex of masculinity. Someone who gave up all of their being for others, that self-emptying love that led to the passion, which was he's so loving and he's so selfless that he gives himself up for people who are not worthy of that gift. And so I think that in reality, we need to always be thinking about, is this something that is self-serving for myself in the short term, or is this something that I would feel right seeing my wholesome, valued mentor doing themselves? So I think that mentorship is critical.
I think that one thing that has been a common denominator about everybody that I've interviewed, and you just touched on it, so it's still hitting 100% on it, is it's who you choose to hang around with, who you choose to be friends with, is a very big determining factor. I haven't heard anybody say, well, I decided which way I was going to go. Nobody else was going that way, so I just did it myself. You've got to have somebody with you.
Yes.
And a mentor and somebody that's, I talked to a young man. In fact, the last interview I did with a young man was his statement was, he said, I look to older people, older men in particular, who have achieved what I want to achieve.
Yes.
And I pay attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not normal thinking for a high school person.
Mm-hmm.
But that's the way to success.
Mm-hmm.
That's what is going to bring you to success.
Mm-hmm.
This has been great. This has really been more than I expected. I want to hear real quick your story about you and Grace. I know you started dating in college, obviously.
Yes. Yeah.
Did you graduate this year too?
I graduated this year as well.
Okay, so you're in basically the same class. Did you meet right away, or tell me the story real quick?
Yeah, well, we met during freshman year of college, and for context, that was COVID, like peak COVID.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
So we met in a freshman year, like campus ministry small group, basically. And we had met there, and we were definitely friends, but due to the sort of nature of COVID, it was hard to
date.
Yeah, we didn't really date. There was not really much to do. You couldn't really interact with people outside of, like, I don't know, like it's freezing in South Bend. We couldn't hang out indoors or whatever. So it's basically like, all right, it's negative 20 out. I'll see you later.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that eventually we kept in touch and we talked a decent amount, but also our friend groups weren't the exact same. But eventually, junior year, we just started connecting over your Nebraska fans might like this, but I had just sent her a text about a coaching change in Nebraska football, and I think that led to she just asked, like, well, do you want to meet up or do you want to see each other? And we
all right.
Yeah, see,
Nebraska football
exactly.
comes through
Nebraska
again.
football, so it's good for something for sure. So I'll always have some admiration for it. But we met and we talked more, and I think that we were just older at that time. I mean, that wasn't like 2 years after we had first met, and I think that things just sort of started to click a bit more, and it worked well. And this was junior year fall, and we went on some dates, and eventually I asked her to be my girlfriend, and she became my girlfriend, and it was very happy.
You actually said, hey, you want to be my girlfriend?
Yes, and I think that's important. I think that's important to, like, be straightforward and say, like, well, can we date? Because I feel like, some of your younger audience members might be thinking nowadays, like, how do you even go about that? And people might say, like, oh, you want to hang out? But I think that for a male, masculine dating is to be very straightforward and on the nose. Say, like, can I take you out on a date? To say a date. So
there's no confusion.
There's no confusion, exactly. And I think that that's also something that women find attractive, a person that's straightforward and says, can I take you on a date? And it's very vulnerable, because it's not like a half and half, like, oh, do you want to hang out? But it's like, can I take you on a date? It's because that's giving them an opportunity to say yes or no. And it's like, I care enough about taking you on a date that I'm going to face vulnerability face to face, and you could say no. So it's an interesting concept, but she said yes, and we started dating, and we were moving fast. We studied abroad in London together that spring. Luckily, we happened to be going to the same place, and I think that we're pretty straightforward people. Even from about 5-6 months in, we had started talking about things like, could you see us getting married, or do we seem like the right people? Is there anything holding us back from being the right people for each other to get married? And I think that we both knew the answers already, that this seems like a meaningful marriage potentially, and it seemed like the right decision. And so the funny thing is, we knew early that we wanted to get married at Notre Dame, and it's hard to get a reservation at the Basilica there. Mm-hmm. Typically, you have to get it 2 years in advance. So our junior spring, we inquired about it, and we got the wedding venue settled 2 years before it actually happened. So we weren't even engaged yet or anything like that.
All right, had you talked to her folks that you met Had met her,
yes,
folks?
I did meet. I met her junior spring in London actually, and so I guess we were moving fast. I hadn't met him yet, but the first time I met them, I definitely knew. I thought very seriously about their daughter, and the listeners have met the Kinsellas, but they've been fantastic and a great role model family as well.
Well, yeah, it's a very good family. I always told my kids to be sure they marry it up, and it sounds like both of you are. So
yes. So we got that wedding venue early, but now, I mean, we did our senior year, have stayed close together, and this last summer I proposed to her.
Mm-hmm.
It was pretty easy. I mean,
in Hawaii.
That's right, a dreamy place to get it done. But so yeah, I mean, we had been dating for about a year and a half, and then got engaged, and now we're coming up with eight months until we get married.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Well, I'll tell you what, this has been fantastic, Zach. Next time you're around, I'd really like to do this again.
Yeah.
Would you be willing?
Yes, I'd be willing for part 2.
Well, you know what? I want to get into some other things that, as far as, well, you're living in New York City now. You're working a job where I assume you're supporting yourself.
Yeah.
And so on and so forth, and how your Christianity is fitting into that and different things like that. Yeah. I think this has really been very, very good for our listeners. I know it's I think it's accomplished what I want to accomplish with these podcasts, and that is to show people that there is a better way to live their life than what the world is offering.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that taking that one step back to Grace specifically in this wedding coming up is, I think that we talked about role models. In a sense, she sort of is my beacon of what's right and what's wrong a lot of time for me. Because, I mean, we had just this last Sunday gone to a mass and had a preacher preach about this, but to say that in marriage, like an ideal marriage, we're thinking about the spouse is putting the other spouse before themselves, and rather than it being a thing where we're independently advocating for ourselves in all the different aspects of life, it's like, I just put her needs before mine, and she puts my needs before her. And you have this complete loving trust that I'm giving my entire self to the other person, and they're the ones that will advocate for me. And you're living a selfless life where you've entrusted yourself to your spouse. And I think that's something that Grace and I are looking forward to really practicing, and will lead to a really happy marriage. And I'm just really happy that our Christian faith has given us the foundation to take those steps forward and to have the right mentality and to have a really successful marriage, which I'm very excited to have with her for the rest of our lives.
I can add nothing to that, Zach. Thank you so much for your time, and I'm looking forward to the next time.
Yes, thank you, Phil. I really appreciate you having me on.
That's our podcast for the day. Thanks for listening. If you're interested in a daily devotional, we have what we call the Word to Live By that goes out every morning. To have that sent to you on a daily basis, send me an email at pbwags@gmail.com. That's pbwaggs@gmail.com. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.